Hello and welcome back to my series, Who Is? The series where I look at notable and historical figures. Today, I want to talk about George S. Patton. Now, with this George S. Patton look, I want to do it a little different. Now see, Patton is someone that is extremely close to my heart. Someone that I've researched, watched movies, read books, almost my entire life. So much so that I think when I was 11 or 12, I dressed up as Patton for Halloween. So how I want to do this with Patton is I want to just kind of talk a little bit about who he is and why I believe he is such a consequential person in American history. Now see, Patton was born in 1885. He came from a military family. Both his father and grandfather served the United States Army. And then Patton would go on, follow in their footsteps, but he attended the United States Military Academy at West Point. There's a famous statue of Patton. What you see is him standing right next to the library, quite literally, right next to the library. And the funny thing about this is that if you know anything about Patton, is he was not a good student while at West Point. So much so that the reason his statue is next to the library is kind of a joke by the United States Army. When they built that statue later on to kind of commemorate his life and legacy, they put it next to the library to say, Patton, in his time in life, he wasn't actually someone who would go to the library so often, but in death and in his memorialization with the statue, he will always be looking right at the library, getting ready to go in there and study. Now, the one thing for Patton is that's a very funny story is he didn't actually need the library. Not very much a book smart person, I would say, but someone who is a tactical genius when you analyze his career and battles that he won over many historical enemies of enemies against the Axis. Patton really gained notoriety in World War II, but he did serve in World War I. During his time in World War I, much like other Allied and of actually at the time Central Powers, but Axis in World War II, gained a lot of experience there as well. Most notably, Patton would gain experience in there. Someone like Erwin Rommel, who you see his arch nemesis, as you could say, in World War II, also gained a lot of experience in World War I. In World War I, Patton very much developed his love and understanding of tank combat and tank warfare, which would later go on to be one of his kind of crowning jewels and crowning tactical master classes, is the ability to use armored divisions in World War II. In World War II, the Americans don't join the war until their attack by the Japanese on Pearl Harbor in 1941. The U.S. Army didn't really have a lot of involvement, actually tactically or militarily, until about 1943, when the United States invades. 1940, 43, when they invade North Africa. Patton's first combat with that is actually him relieving another general in North Africa after a horrific and terrible loss at Cascarine Pass to said Erwin Rommel that I said earlier, who would go on to really be Patton's arch nemesis. Arch might be strong, but definitely a nemesis and someone he came up against a lot in World War II. In North Africa, Patton's task was to essentially take over a platoon that had just been embarrassed by the Germans, come in, shape it up, get it ready, combat ready, and have it ready to display and compete against Rommel in a pivotal landing point that would then allow them to jump off and gain some control of the Mediterranean if they could take North Africa to then eventually launch their invasion of Italy and subsequent things they want to do. In North Africa, Patton gains a tactical victory over the Germans. Unfortunately, not against Rommel, the battle that he fights in North Africa that really kind of, I would say, wins it for the Americans and for Patton. Rommel is actually sick. He would eventually get recalled after kind of a losing fight that he would have later on in his time in North Africa against the Allies, people like Montgomery and the British, the Americans as well. But Patton really gained a lot of claim and fame from there. From there, he has as a launching point that in 1943, his second biggest campaign is in Sicily. When the Americans invade Sicily, They need Patton and his tactical abilities to help push against the Germans and Italians. Really, at this time, though, majorly it was the Germans that were protecting Italy. By that time, the Italian army had proven that its inability to actually fight as a fighting force was not. It was. If you look a lot of history books, Mussolini actually argues to Hitler, Adolf Hitler, the German leader and German dictator. Before the war, he did not believe that the actual Italian forces were ready. A lot of talk and a lot of boasting that they were ready, that they'd be ready to go, they were ready to do their part and invade, stuff like that. But there was a lot of conversations with Italian generals and that the army was actually not up to fighting force and ready to go. Very much proved it in World War II in both North Africa and the defense of Italy and the other involvements that they had, whether it be in the Balkans. Really kind of their only major victory was against Albania. When they eventually went on to go invade Greece, they need a lot of German assistance actually to move forward. But back to Patton, the topic on hand. So Patton is sent to Sicily in 1943. He helps the Allies win at, actually kind of develops a inter-ally nemesis during that time called Bernard Montgomery. Actually, one of the most famous scenes, I would say, not one of the most famous scenes from this movie. I think there's a lot of scenes, but a movie that really displays Patton's life and a lot of historical moments in it. From 1970 is the movie called Patton, just his last name. George C. Scott is the actor who plays him. The movie actually won an award. Won an Emmy for it, and really in this this movie, it displays a lot of these scenes. Well, a lot of these moments that we'll talk about later on in this video. But kind of the most important scene that it displays is the idea that Patton, he essentially goes to Sicily. They don't really go with Patton's plan. They instead go with the Allied General Montgomery's plan. This plan essentially sends Patton this long way around Sicily, having to capture towns, but the goal and the point is to eventually end up in Messina, kind of the last point and capital, as so to speak, of Sicily. So Patton essentially rushes around, gets his way, wins a whole bunch of battles. They end up in Sicily, and in the movie, what happens is Patton's already gotten there. You don't know this until Montgomery's marching in, bagpipes are playing, and all of a sudden he marches in, and you have Patton's tank columns lined up, his soldiers lined up, and so to speak, essentially beats Montgomery there. In real life, same thing. A lot of these kind of inter-allied rivalries would develop between Montgomery and Patton. So much so that that he kind of came of a nemesis, but you can't really say that, both fighting on the same side. But very much a lot of times you'll see some diverting of resources that angers Patton and helps, prevent Patton's actual attack and movement. Would happen later on in such battles as a lot of resources going to Montgomery's Operation Market Garden, which would delay Patton's advance through France into Germany, which eventually, led to Market Garden being a disaster. But a lot of people argue, if you look at it, Patton probably could have gotten to Berlin before the Russians had those resources. Back to the top on hand. So Sicily happens. The Americans win. Patton has a lot of tactical masterclass, genius, strategist. But unfortunately, the one part you have to talk about Patton is there is some controversies that happen. One such controversy happens in Sicily. So in 1943, Patton is fighting in Sicily, and he comes into a medical tent, and there's a soldier who is sitting in the tent, not injured, no injury, anything, with all these other men that have been shot, wounded, missing legs, nasty stuff. And he's just sitting there, he breaking down, crying, so to speak. And Patton walks up to him and asks him, what is he suffering with, yada yada yada. And guy's crying. Asks the doctors. Doctors say, it's battle fatigue. Battle fatigue nowadays would be known as PTSD, things like that. So at the time, very much, especially in the military, if you compare it to nowadays, something like battle fatigue, as it was called in World War II, that is a real thing, PTSD and that. But at the time, very much, especially in World War II, that Patton and how he grew up in it was seen as something he would call as cowardice. So what Patton does in that situation is he slaps the soldier, pulls out his gun, almost pretty much points it at him and tells him, he sent him to the front lines. He will not have any cowards in his army. He won't have any men who don't want to fight with men who have actually who are bleeding and losing limbs and on the front line fighting for their country. So this is unacceptable. Wouldn't affect Patton's career right then in the moment, but later on, a couple months later, it actually led to him losing command of his army. So much that actually kept Patton out of the war for a long time, about a year and a half. Patton is completely out of World War II. He doesn't come back until the Allies, essentially right before the invasion of France in D-Day on June 6th. A couple months before that, essentially what happens is the Germans didn't believe that Patton actually had been relieved. In the German army, slapping a soldier, that was, for a lack of a better terms, like that was a cupcake for them. In regards to them, a lot of they would shoot soldiers. They would, send soldiers to the front line. They do something wrong, instead of you being on an easy posting, you get sent to the front line in Russia. Things like that. So for the Germans, they didn't believe that. So what happens is Patton gets sent to England, and he's essentially a decoy. So what happens is the army he's assigned to is a army of ghosts, phantoms, right? Blow up dolls and tanks and people. And he's stationed in England, in southern England, with the idea and look that he's going to launch an invasion into Calais. With this, essentially it provides a very big distraction for the Allies to then land in Normandy on June 6th, Utah Beach, Omaha Beach, because what happened is the Germans would leave a lot of their tanks in reserve. So Hitler really bought into the fact that Patton was going to invade Calais. Calais made perfect sense. It's the shortest route from England to France. So they really believed that Patton was going to invade with his army. These dolls and these phantom things that they were getting recon reports about and news reports on, they thought they were all real. So Patton really serves as a diversion in this war, in this invasion. Essentially, the invasion happens, as everyone knows, the United States, Canadians, Allies, French, free French resistance, Polish, whatnot, various Allied entities invade, get into France. They make it, pretty deep in there. And then all of a sudden they hit a bog. A lot of hedges, not able to actually move the army happens. And what happens is that Dwight D. Eisenhower needs an experienced tank commander who can move across the French countryside and get positions, encirclements, moving. Someone who knows how to get an army moving as quick as possible. That guy is Patton. So what happened to Patton then, kind of forgiven for his slapping a soldier in controversy, reinstated for the third, given the Third Army in France, actual divisions now, not phantom fake things, real tank, real manpower, and he's sent essentially across France to spearhead the capturing of different towns and really kind of getting that army moving. Patton trains his men. That's one thing that Patton's known for so notably, is that he is someone who can get men moving, get them moving quick, inspire them, so much so that the men, they fear Patton. They fear what Patton would do to them more than they fear the enemy. So Patton essentially gets the Allied offensive moving after Normandy, a couple weeks and a couple months after Normandy. So much moving that he's making breakneck paces. I referenced the Patton movie earlier on in this video. Another famous scene is that there's essentially he's Omar Bradley, a famous World War II general and one of Patton's friends, someone who actually served under Patton in North Africa. He's reading reports in the movie and in the scene. Essentially, it's saying essentially, paraphrasing, not exactly what it's saying, but, Patton's moving at a break-left pace, faster than anyone would expect. They're talking about, give him a little more gas, he'll give you another, 100 miles. So that's what Patton essentially was doing, very much moving quickly and going. From there, it gets so much so that Patton gets up to a point where there's this kind of thing kind of not thing, but kind of problem that happens. Patton is ready to keep on marching, cross the Rhine. He gets into Germany. keep going towards Berlin, and there's this dilemma. Operation Market Garden by Montgomery, someone I mentioned earlier, kind of essentially Patton's nemesis, even though they're on the same side. There's the idea of launching Montgomery's plan into Market Garden to free up that Dutch and Belgium region, or there's the idea, keep giving Patton his resources and whatnot, gas, things like that, to get moving and go closer and closer towards Berlin. But unfortunately, they give the resources away from Patton, halt his offensive completely, give it to Montgomery, then Market Garden happens. Now, if you know anything about Market Garden, this is a disaster. It's one of the glowing blunders of the Allied offensive against the Germans when they're actually in the full invasion process. It doesn't go very well. They expect some less resistance. Actually turns out the Germans had a full battalions, offensive and whatnot, ready and set up. Goes disastrously. But one of the main selling points of this is that these resources got diverted from Patton. A lot of people, if you really read into this, argue that Patton probably could have gone and taken over, or not gone and taken over. He probably could have gotten to Berlin if he had these resources before the Red Army, before the break of the war, and the Red Army actually gets to Berlin first. A lot of people argue that Patton probably could have made it at the rate he was moving. The next major part and thing that happens for Patton is 1944, the Battle of the Bulge, probably the last consequential battle, I would say, of World War II. This is the last German counteroffensive that they can actually perform. They've been building these resources in secret, these tanks, getting everything assembled, and a lot of battles such as Bastogne, things like that. Bastogne, famous for the U.S. airborne, going in and then getting encircled. Patton's actually sent to go save them and help them. So what happened in the Battle of Bulge is, like I said, the Germans are building up this massive force, the last force they can really ever assemble. At that time, Patton is consequential in this fight in World War II. If you have the wrong general who goes into this battle and is not able to move quick enough and, first of all, not get the airborne division safe in Bastogne, but also not able to actually get ready and be prepared and know the Germans are ready to launch a counteroffensive, a lot of arguments that Germans definitely could have broken out of kind of the holding points that they were in Germany during the Battle of Bulge, and probably pushed the Allies back. So much so that not that the Allies probably would have lost the war, but the war definitely would have been prolonged a couple more years if they were able to regain some territory and kind of get that fighting force up and running how it was running earlier on in the war. Subsequently, Patton will win that Battle of the Bulge and really be a decisive person. Some weather will help him that he will get. He'll win that, and from there he'll march on deeper and deeper into Germany, so much so that the war eventually end. Patton doesn't reach Berlin first, something that he really hates, but something that doesn't happen. But Patton really does help with that war. In conclusion, Patton, such a controversial figure, but also a figure that is so important to World War II. Probably Patton's last act before he dies is probably what really gets sent Patton a lot of hate / maybe not hate, but kind of ends his career kind of pretty abruptly. So the war is pretty much run down to the end, and Patton has this famous quote where they're sitting, the war's over, and all the equipment, obviously, right? And the Germans have just been defeated. Patton and his army, and the rest of the U.S. Army, and various allies are sitting right in Germany with the Russians on one side, them on the other. And Patton makes this statement that all the equipment is here. Why are we going to let the Russians, just go? Like we're going to have to fight them eventually. So let's start this war again. Let's get we got the Germans out of the way. Let's time to go get the Russians. That obviously will not do Patton any favors. Russians were just allies, and at that time, that did not go over well. So Patton's career kind of ends there, and then he will go off and ride into the sunset. And unfortunately for Patton, someone who so famously, he carried pearl grip pistols on his side. He will then go and unfortunately die in a car accident. Not how he wanted to die. Very, very notable for saying he wanted to go out on a hero's death. He really believed in reincarnation, fighting battles. He wanted to go out a soldier's death, and unfortunately for Patton, it didn't go that way, dying right after the war, I think in 1946. Patton, such a consequential figure in World War II, and someone that close to my heart with the historical research I've always done on him, but someone I really feel that, yes, he has his controversies, but he's so important to the U.S. Military effort in World War II, and so important as someone that we constantly have to look at. So I hope you enjoyed Who Is. Today was a look at Patton, someone, as I said, so close to my heart. But remember, look out for more Who Is episodes on this channel. It's a series where I look at notable figures that one strike interest in me, but also someone that I do a little looking up, or maybe I watch a movie and see something about them, and I might know a little bit. And I just want to share a little chance to ramble and a little chance to talk about some people that are very important in our history. Hope you guys have a great day. Look out for some more content.